Okay, so get ready, because today we are diving into Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature. This book is seriously packed with insights into, well, us, humans.
It really is. It's not your typical self-help book, though, is it? I mean, Greene isn't just trying to explain human nature. He's giving us the tools to actually use it, navigate it.
Exactly. And he starts with something kind of, well, a bit unsettling, our irrationality. We all like to think we're so logical, right?
Yeah.
But Greene's saying that our emotions, they're often the ones really running the show.
Yeah, and we don't even realize it half the time. We think we're being all rational and making careful choices, but deep down, it's all our emotions pulling the strings. That's why self-awareness is so important.
Right. Like Greene's giving us this, I don't know, a way to actually see those hidden forces that are driving us. And once you see them, there's no going back. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Totally. So let's talk about narcissism. This is one of the big ones, right? Greene says every single one of us has some degree of narcissism.
Okay, so we're all narcissists now.
Well, hold on. It's not as bad as it sounds. He's careful to say that there's a big difference between, just having some self-confidence and being destructively narcissistic.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
So how do we tell the difference? I mean, how does Greene say we can tell healthy self-regard from the kind that makes you want to run for the hills?
He's really clear that healthy confidence is about knowing your worth. Destructive narcissism, that's about needing everyone else to constantly validate you. And that can get messy fast.
So someone who's always bragging or putting others down, that's a red flag.
Exactly. Those are some big warning signs. And, Greene actually thinks we can use that natural self-focus we all have to connect with people in a more genuine way.
Really? I'm not sure I follow.
How so?
Well, think about it. Everyone wants to feel interesting and important, right? So if we can, actually listen to people, show genuine interest, we actually end up connecting with them on a deeper level.
So it's like turning that narcissistic energy outward.
Yeah.
Instead of just focusing on ourselves, we become more interested in other people. Exactly. And Greene even says it can be a powerful tool for building relationships. Who knew? Okay,
that's a new way to look at it. So instead of always talking about ourselves, we should focus on really listening, being present with the other person.
Right. And on the flip side, Greene also gives us some tools to recognize when someone else's narcissism might be destructive, beyond just being a little self-centered.
Oh, yeah. We all know those types. They just suck the energy out of the room, right?
Yeah.
Always have to be the center of attention.
Exactly. Greene highlights things like, constant need for validation, putting others down to make themselves look better. Basically, if someone consistently makes you feel bad about yourself, that's a big red flag.
They could be caught in that narcissistic web, as you say. Makes you wonder how much of that is conscious, right? I mean, Greene also talks about how we all wear masks, presenting different versions of ourselves depending on the situation.
It's true, and we all do it. You think about how you are at work versus, say, with your best friend, you're going to act a little different, right? It's natural to adapt to the situation.
That's a really good point. It's like we're constantly adjusting to fit in or to, get what we want.
Exactly. But Greene says it's important to be aware of those masks, both our own and those of the people around us.
That makes sense, but how do we even begin to spot them? I mean, how can you tell if someone's being genuine or if they're just putting on a show?
Well, he talks a lot about paying close attention to body language. Like, is their smile genuine? Are they fidgeting? Those little inconsistencies can actually tell us a lot more than words sometimes.
So it's about learning to read between the lines.
Yeah.
Almost like becoming an emotional detective, right?
Exactly. And the more we can fine-tune those observation skills, the better we become at, figuring out what's really going on beneath the surface, even if someone's trying really hard to hide it.
Okay, that's both fascinating and a little intimidating. So far, we've covered irrationality, narcissism, and wearing masks.
Well,
what other intriguing laws does Greene explore? Stuff that can help us actually use all this to, understand people better.
It's funny because you saying that kind of reminds me of another law Greene talks about, the law of compulsive behavior.
Okay, compulsive behavior. So, like bad habits?
Yeah, kinda. But it's more than that, right? He's talking about these patterns that we all have. Like, we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over.
Oh, I know that one all too well. So how does this law of compulsive behavior, how does it play out when it comes to our relationships with others?
Well, he says that, we tend to fall into the same patterns in our relationships, too.
Like always going for the same type of person, even if it's not good for us.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, we often don't even realize we're doing it until it's, too late. But Greene says once you become aware of these patterns, that's when you can actually start to break free from them.
So it's not just about understanding our own patterns, but also recognizing those patterns in other people.
Right, and this is where things get really interesting because he talks about how once you start to see these patterns in yourself and others, you can actually start to change your own behavior.
Okay, I like that. So it's not just about being self-aware, but actually using that awareness to make better choices.
Yeah.
Choices that lead to healthier relationships.
Exactly, because let's face it, some people are just stuck in these negative patterns and there's only so much you can do. And speaking of negative patterns, Greene also digs into this whole thing about envy.
Oh, envy, yeah. It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially these days with social media. It's like everyone's constantly comparing themselves to everyone else.
And Greene calls this out specifically in the law of envy. He says it's this, like, fundamental human emotion, but it can also be incredibly toxic, like a poison if you let it fester.
It's so true. How many times have you scrolled through your feed and ended up feeling worse about yourself? It can be such a trap.
Totally. And it's not just about, wanting what other people have. Greene says envy can actually drive us to sabotage our own success.
Oh, wow. That's scary. So what can we do about it? How do we escape that comparison trap, especially when it feels like we're constantly bombarded with images of, other people's perfect lives?
Well, Greene suggests that instead of focusing on what other people have, we need to, define success on our own terms. What actually matters to us.
So instead of trying to keep up with the Joneses, we should be figuring out what makes us feel fulfilled.
Right. And he says a big part of that is learning to appreciate what we already have.
Yeah.
Practicing gratitude.
It's so easy to take things for granted. But you're right, gratitude can be such a powerful antidote to envy.
And Greene also talks about the importance of, focusing on our own journey. Because the truth is, everyone's fighting their own battles.
That's a good reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in other people's highlight reels and forget that everyone has their own struggles.
Exactly. And speaking of struggles, Greene also dives into this really interesting law, the law of conformity.
Okay, the law of conformity. I have a feeling I know this one. It's about following the crowd, right? Even when we know better.
Yep, that's the one. He's basically saying that we have this deep-seated need to fit in, to be accepted by the group,
No.
even if it means compromising our own values.
It's like that saying, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? We don't want to be the odd one out.
It's totally primal. And Greene says it goes back to, our tribal instincts. But he also warns that blind conformity can be dangerous.
Yeah, look at history. How many atrocities have been committed in the name of just following orders?
Exactly. So he's not saying we should, become rebels or anything, but he does encourage us to question the status quo and, to have the courage to be different.
It's about thinking for ourselves and not just blindly accepting things because everyone else does.
And he even says that, sometimes the greatest thinkers, the real innovators, they're the ones who are willing to challenge the norms and go against the grain.
Makes you wonder how many great ideas have been stifled because people were too afraid to rock the boat.
Right. And this actually ties into another one of his laws that I think is really powerful, the law of repression.
Okay, repression. So we're getting into Freud and the unconscious mind here?
Yeah, kind of. But Greene puts his own spin on it. He's saying that we all have these parts of ourselves that we try to hide. Those parts that we deem unacceptable or undesirable.
Oh, yeah. I think we all have those little voices in our heads telling us we're not good enough or not smart enough or not whatever enough.
Exactly. And Greene isn't saying we should all just, let it all hang out. But he does suggest that by acknowledging those shadow aspects, those parts of ourselves that we try to keep hidden, we can actually gain a deeper understanding of ourselves.
So it's not about trying to be perfect, but rather about being whole.
Exactly. Because those repressed parts of ourselves, they don't just disappear. They can actually end up driving our behavior in ways we don't even realize.
It's like they're working behind the scenes, sabotaging us from the inside out.
Right. And he says, this can lead to all sorts of problems in our relationships and in our lives. So the key is to, shine a light on those shadow aspects and integrate them into our sense of self.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about accepting all parts of ourselves, even the messy bits.
And Greene says that once we can do that for ourselves, it actually becomes easier to accept those same complexities in other people.
It's about embracing our shared humanity, flaws and all.
Exactly. And this actually leads us to another one of Greene's laws that I think is super relevant to, pretty much everyone. The law of lack of objectives.
Lack of objectives. So not having goals.
Yeah, but it's more nuanced than that, right? He's saying that a lot of us, we go through life without really knowing what we want. We just kind of go through the motions.
Oh, I've totally been there, just drifting along, hoping for the best.
And Greene says that this lack of direction, it can actually be a major source of unhappiness. Because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
So what's the solution? How do we find our objectives, our purpose?
He says it starts with, really looking inwards, figuring out what truly matters to us. Like, what are our values? What do we want our legacy to be?
Those are big questions, not the kind you answer over a cup of coffee.
And it's a process, for sure. But Greene says that it's worth it. Because once you have that clarity, once you know what you're working towards, that's when life starts to feel more meaningful.
It's like having a compass to guide us, instead of just wandering aimlessly through the wilderness.
It's about taking control of our own narratives, right? Becoming the authors of our own lives.
It's funny you should say that because it makes me think about another one of Greene's laws that really stuck with me. This whole idea of seeking validation from others. Even when we've accomplished something amazing, it's like we need that external approval to actually feel good about ourselves.
You're talking about the law of grandeur, right? It's like we have this image in our heads of how successful and important we are, but then we end up needing everyone else to constantly confirm it for us.
Exactly. Like we achieve something great and then immediately look around for someone to notice, to pat us on the back and tell us how amazing we are.
It's like we haven't actually internalized the win, We're still looking for that external validation to make it real.
It's so true. So how do we break free from that? How do we get to a place where we can actually own our accomplishments and feel that sense of satisfaction without needing someone else to give it to us?
Well, Greene talks a lot about the importance of, defining success on our own terms. Like, what does success actually look like to you? Not to your parents, not to society, but to you.
Right, because otherwise we're always chasing someone else's definition of success.
Exactly. And that's a recipe for, unhappiness. Because you're never going to be enough for everyone else. You can't please everyone.
It's like that saying, you're never going to be as good as everyone else thinks you should be. So we might as well just focus on being the best version of ourselves.
Exactly. And that starts with figuring out what truly matters to you. What are your values? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world?
I like that. It's about finding that internal compass and letting it guide us instead of constantly looking to others for direction.
It's about trusting ourselves, our own instincts, our own judgment. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with the choices you make.
And speaking of choices, Greene also has some really insightful things to say about leadership. Specifically, the importance of consistency.
Yeah, he talks about this in the law of inconsistency, right? He's basically saying that when you're in a position of power, people are always watching you, and they're looking for any little sign that you don't know what you're doing or that you're not being genuine.
It's like you're under a microscope, right? Every move you make is scrutinized.
And Greene says that those inconsistencies, even small ones, can really damage your credibility.
Because it makes you look untrustworthy, right? Like you're saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly. So Greene's advice is to be really mindful of how your actions align with your words. Because people can spot a fake a mile away.
It's about walking the talk, right? Being authentic in everything you do.
And it's not about being perfect, because nobody's perfect.
Right.
But it's about being self-aware and striving for consistency in your behavior.
That makes sense. So moving on to something that feels particularly relevant in today's world, aggression. Greene talks about how we live in a world where people are constantly competing for resources, for power, for attention. And that can bring out a lot of aggressive behavior, both on an individual and a societal level.
It's true. It's like everyone's fighting for a piece of the pie. And sometimes it feels like there's not enough to go around.
So how do we navigate that? How do we stand up for ourselves, set boundaries, without getting caught in that cycle of aggression?
Well, Greene is a big believer in, choosing your battles wisely. He says that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression is not aggression in return.
It's about staying calm, keeping a cool head, even when someone else is trying to bait you into a fight.
Exactly, because often the people who are the most aggressive, they're the ones who are the most insecure.
So sometimes the best way to disarm someone is to not react at all.
Exactly. And Greene also talks about the importance of, being strategic in how you respond to aggression. Like sometimes it's better to walk away from a situation that's just going to escalate.
It's about protecting your own energy and not letting someone else's negativity drag you down.
And, this actually ties into another one of his laws that I think is really important for all of us to keep in mind. The law of generational myopia.
Okay, generational myopia. So this is about how each generation tends to see the world through their own narrow lens.
Exactly. It's like We forget that the world doesn't start and end with our own experiences.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, right? Like thinking that our way is the only way or the right way.
Right. And Greene's point is that every generation has something valuable to offer. Like, each generation has its own strengths and weaknesses, its own blind spots.
It's about recognizing that we all have something to learn from each other, regardless of our age or background.
Exactly. And that's how we bridge those generational divides, right? By being open to different perspectives and by recognizing that wisdom can come from unexpected places.
It's about embracing the richness and diversity of human experience.
And realizing that we're all in this together, right? We're all just trying to figure things out as we go along.
Well said. This deep dive into the laws of human nature has been absolutely fascinating. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too. Greene's book is definitely one that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
It's a book that makes you think differently about yourself, about other people, about the world.
And hopefully it gives us all a few more tools to navigate this whole crazy thing called life.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we highly recommend checking out Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Subscribe to this channel for a new daily episode on the best personal and financial growth books.